The Old One, a story of the world's oldest shark introduction deep beneath the Arctic ice, where sunlight becomes a rumor and the sea moves with a slow, ancient patience, lives a creature older than nations. Scientists call it the Greenland shark. Sailors whisper other names. To the Inuit of the North, it has long been a presence of the deep, cold, slow, and eternal. They say some of these sharks were born before the first maps were drawn. Before empires rose or fell, they moved through dark water like a memory. In this story, we will follow one such animal, Old One, as the crew of the research vessel came to call her, and through her long life, we will touch centuries of human history, the slow pulse of deep time, and the fragile beauty of a world we cannot fully see. This is a tale of survival, of silence, of endurance. It is a story of the oldest living vertebrate known to science, and of what it teaches us about time, humility, and the hidden lives beneath the waves. Chapter 1, Born into Ice. The year was not written in any human chronicle. There was no daylight fireworks or church bells to mark the moment. The ocean simply made room for one more life. From an egg case, pale and flexible, a small shark emerged gray, awkward, less than a meter long. It swam in the cold with a slow, steady kick and a curiosity that would carry it through centuries. Its species, Somniosus microcephalus, the Greenland shark, is built for this harsh world. Thick flesh and a liver rich in oil help it buffer cold and float with economy. Muscle moves slowly beneath skin woven by centuries of evolutionary patience. It is not built for quick hunts, rather for persistence. The young shark learned the ocean's rhythm, the long, silent migrations of seals and cod, the slow drift of plankton, the distant thunder of ice calving in the far north. Life here is measured not in days, but in seasons, in decades. Where other animals live fast and bright and die young, this shark would grow in the opposite way, accumulating years like strata of cold, clear water. In time, the shark left the sheltered shallows where it was born and took the deep stairway down, preferring the thin blue light and the ocean's slow currents. It learned to move with an economy of effort, to glide where others chase. It learned, as all long-lived things learn, to wait. Chapter 2. The ocean school as she grew. Old One passed through the classrooms of the sea. There were lessons in stealth and patience. Seals taught her how to pick an ambush. Sunken carcasses taught her the value of a slow appetite. Some prey she took in bursts of energy, a sudden lunge at a seal hauling itself onto an ice floe, but often she fed on the quieter bounty. Dead whales drifting down from the surface. Fish careless in the current, the occasional oddity that humans attributed to bad luck or omens. Greenland sharks are not sprinters. Their muscles lack the fast twitch fibers of other predators. Instead, they cruise with an economy that is almost philosophical. A hunt is a measured act. A meal, when found, is savored slowly. This same economy of motion protects them from the cold. Each movement consumes precious energy in a place where calories are expensive. Over decades, Old One wandered the deep. She brushed past the dark silhouettes of icebergs, those inverted mountains whose slow movements shaped currents and eddies. On the surface, human things, wooden ships, tugboats, even metal steamers, came and went. Whalers followed their lines. Empires rose and receded like tides. Many human names became stones underfoot in history. Kings, explorers, merchants. None of them wrote Old One's birth year. None of them noticed the quiet count of her years. But humans did leave traces in the deep, nets and lines, hooks and debris. Old One encountered them in time. She carried scars from old snags and the occasional embedded metal, reminders that even the deep listens to the surface as follies. Chapter 3. The slow clock. Greenland sharks age slow because they are governed by a slow clock. Recent science has shown what the Inuit and sailors long suggested. These sharks live for centuries. Radiocarbon dating of islands' proteins places some individuals at 300 to 500 years old, perhaps more. Imagine an animal that outlives emperors and explorers, one that moved through centuries as humans moved through seasons. For Old One, each birthday blurred into the next. The calendar of her life was marked by shifts in currents, by the arrival of warm years, by the slow retreat of ice. She witnessed changes in fish populations. Cod that once teemed in certain channels began to wander elsewhere. In some centuries, she found bounty in one trench. In others, she had to move. A life lived across centuries confers a strange kind of knowledge. Old One knew where the whales came to rest in winter and where the cod gathered in autumn. She learned what scars mean, the white line of healed skin that tells a predator it survived a net. The circular tooth mark that tells of a single narrow escape. In this patient way she adapted. She also experienced the deep ocean's most unusual partnership with bacteria and with chemical compounds that make the Greenland shark's flesh toxic to predators and to any human who eats it raw. Trimethylamine oxide and high urea concentrations preserve proteins in freezing water and are part of what made this species unique. These chemicals are not magic, they are evolutionary tools. For Old One, they were the difference between survival in the deep cold and a quick, hungry death. Chapter 4. Encounters with humans. Humans did not always understand these slow animals. For centuries, they saw the shark as a monster of legend. Sailors told stories of ships shadowed by ice ghosts with great graybacks. Coastal peoples feared its jaws. Inland chroniclers used it as a symbol of time's cruelty. Then, in the age of science, people began to study the Greenland shark with a different gaze. Oceanographers and biologists, with nets and later with submersibles and tags, began to meet Old One's descendants. They learned to sample tissue, to measure lengths, to attach markers that told of migratory routes. Research vessels braved polar storms, and teams lowered remote cameras into the black. Old One once brushed past a metal cage with a glowing contraption attached. A scientist on the surface felt a jolt of wonder. The camera captured a slow, indifferent angle of a gray flank. Years later, another team pulled up a line with Old One's chipped tooth stuck in a dead seal, a small, biological book with a story inside. Sometimes hunters and fishers found Greenland sharks washed ashore or entangled. Tales of misfortune accompanied those findings. But slowly, attitudes shifted from fear to respect. The world learned that these sharks were not monsters, but keepers of time, animals to be watched and protected. Chapter 5. The frosted seas change across centuries. The climate shifted and the ice that shaped oceans began to change. For Old One and her kin, the landscape of currents and prey moved in slow patterns. But humans began to influence the system in faster ways than nature normally permitted. Industrial whaling, commercial fishing, and much later, greenhouse warming each nudged the balance. Old One experienced this as a rearrangement of her hunting grounds. Whales that used to beach along certain routes now altered their paths. Seals moved their birthing grounds. Currents warmed in places that once were permanently cold. For an animal that had stitched its routine across centuries, these shifts were like a traveler arriving in a city where the streets had been reordered. She survived because long-lived creatures find resilience in time itself. Old One could shift range, find quieter depths, follow prey deeper or farther. But the changes left traces in her population. Younger sharks face new hazards. More nets, more boats, more plastic. The deep no longer felt as remote. Chapter 6. The Old One's Great Migration. One summer that humans later called the Ice Melt Year. A year of storms and unusually warm currents. Old One undertook a migration, the elders in her watery world marked with attention. She left the quiet abyss where she spent her long winters and followed a scent trail for many leagues. The sounds of whales below in a churning sea. The drift of a dead whale sent through cold water. For a creature that lived slow, this movement was a poem of purpose. On a moonless night, a small research vessel chanced into the same stretch of sea. The crew were not the grand explorers of old. They were scientists and students, young and curious, wrapped in modern gear and eager not for conquest, but for knowledge. Their sonar pinged, and in the glow of their instruments appeared a long, deliberate shape. They named her Old One for the way she moved, unhurried and deliberate. The camera caught close shots of barnacles, of scars, of tiny creatures hitching a ride on her skin. The researchers recorded slow swimming speeds and digestive samples that hinted at a diet both opportunistic and patient. One of them, a doctoral student with a pencil always tucked behind an ear, whispered as she watched the footage, "She feels like a library." It was a word that stuck, living memory. The team placed a small satellite tag, designed to pop free after a year. For a long-lived animal, that was a blink, but they hoped for glimpses. Migration patterns, sea temperatures, glimpses of the changing Arctic from the shark's slow vantage. Old One accepted the tag like a tired traveler accepting a note in a pocket. Chapter 7. Lessons from Silence. Old One taught the researchers what centuries of books could not. How to be patient with data. How to listen for patterns that unfold over decades. The tag told a slow story. Long spales at depth in winter, slow climbs near the ice in spring, months of wandering across channels where human maps called nothing but blue. The team published papers and gave talks. They argued in journals about lifespan estimates, digestion rates, and the effect of contaminants. Some people cared deeply, others saw the shark as an oddity at the edge of charts. But those who listened found a reality that unsettled modern calendars. That time could be measured differently, that deep life keeps rhythms beyond our short, loud lives. Old One continued. She bore more scars as years passed. A faint line across her flank told of a net encounter that nearly ended her life. A missing chunk of fin suggested a collision with a ship's propeller long ago. Yet she swam on, patient and slow. Her body carried the story of survival in its every scar and patch of healed skin. Chapter 8. A whale, a storm, a final lesson. In one late autumn, Old One encountered an event that would be remembered in the researchers' notes and in the quiet records of the sea. A beaked whale had died in open water, its body drifting downward in stages as scavengers took their share. For weeks, its scent pulsed through the water column, and the deep community gathered. Sleeper sharks, hagfish, amphipods, and the slow, sure Old One. The feeding was not a frenzy, but a procession. Old One circled, taking slow, careful bites. She left the most nourishing parts until last, a conservation in a world where energy is a currency. The researchers recorded the feast, noting how the shark's presence kept larger, more aggressive scavengers at bay. In her patience, she allowed a balance. The whale's nutrients fed many, spread through time. A storm hit days after the feast. Winds broke the ice and rearranged the sea's surface. A research buoy sent a scattered signal. The satellite tag that had ridden with Old One sent back a strong burst of data. The researchers watched the graphs of depth and temperature as if listening to a heartbeat. Old One plunged, deeper than usual, into colder water. For a day, the tag sent muddled signals. For a week, it fell silent. The researchers feared a lost tag, a broken instrument. When some months later, the tag washed ashore on an island, its data vault recovered, the patterns told a story, a sudden deep dive during the storm, a long period at depth, then a slow return to familiar tracks. Old One had survived. She had endured another year. Chapter 9. The fragile future centuries teach humility. For the researchers, Old One became an emblem not of conquest, but of responsibility. If a single shark could stitch centuries into a life, then human acts that reshape oceans over decades should give pause. Industrial fishing, warming seas, contamination. Each is a thread tugged in a tapestry of time. Old One and her kin face threats that are new in their scale. Nets cut paths across migration corridors. Plastics collect in gyres and chemical traces reach even the deep. Their slow reproduction and late maturity mean that populations cannot rebound quickly. What one century of whaling or trawling can damage, centuries of slow life cannot easily repair. Nevertheless, the story is not only of loss, it is also of wonder. The world still holds animals that measure existence differently than we do. Seeing them should not be a command to preserve. It should be an invitation to listen and to learn how to live within a web of time scales larger than our own. Epilogue. Old time, new voices. Old one kept moving long after the researchers returned home and wrote their papers. She moved with the slow choreography of centuries, shaping and shaped by a world that changes little as well as sometimes quickly. Her life was a ledger of cold years and brief warming, of storms and silent seasons. She carried within her the deep patience of the sea. The scientists who watched her footage took their lessons back to cities with streetlights and schedules. They told the public of slow lives and long clocks. Children drew sharks and labeled them Old One with crayons. Policymakers listened, then argued. Sometimes they protected a patch of sea, sometimes not. One night, looking out from a small research station as Aurora painted the sky, the lead scientist whispered, "She was older than my history books, and quieter than all of them too." And he understood then that knowledge is not only what we find, but what we choose to protect. Old One kept swimming. Perhaps she still swims now as you read this, moving through cold currents that have remembered ice since before the first kingdoms of men. She is a living bridge to a different scale of time, a reminder that the ocean keeps history not in stone halls, but in living flesh. And if, someday, we learn to listen better, we may learn to be worthy of such company. Thank you for watching this story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me create more stories like this. And if you want to dive even deeper into the mysteries of the ocean, check out the other videos on my channel. See you in the next one.